Chains rattled against her wrists as the alien girl was shoved forward into the ruined hall. Dust drifted down from the cracked ceiling, and the faint smell of smoke stung her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. Every story she had ever heard about humans screamed inside her head. Humans were monsters, cruel beings who captured her kind only to torture and kill them. Now she was their prisoner. Her knees trembled, but she kept her chin up, refusing to cry in front of them. The humans spoke in their sharp, guttural language, voices echoing off the stone walls. She couldn't understand their words, but the tone was clear, harsh, angry, dangerous. One soldier pushed her down to the floor. The impact sent pain shooting through her shoulder, and she hissed. She braced herself, waiting for the first blow, the first knife, the first act of cruelty, but none came. Instead, the humans argued among themselves, their eyes darting toward her, their hands gripping their weapons tightly, as if she might suddenly leap at them. She wished she could. She wished she could fight, but she was too weak. Blood stained her side from a wound she had gotten during the battle. Every breath burned. The chains cut into her skin, biting deep, a reminder that she was completely at their mercy. A shadow moved in front of her. She looked up. One of the soldiers stepped closer. He was taller than the others, like broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a helmet. His boots stopped just inches from her legs. Her pulse spiked. This was it, the executioner. She braced for death, clenching her teeth so she wouldn't scream. But then something strange happened. He knelt down, slowly, carefully. His gloved hand reached toward her, and she flinched, her whole body tensing. She expected pain. Instead, she felt a touch, gentle, almost careful. The soldier's fingers brushed near her wound, not pressing, not hurting, just checking. Confusion flooded her mind. This wasn't what she had been told. Humans didn't touch softly. Humans didn't show care. Yet here he was, studying her injury, his eyes narrowing, not with cruelty but with concern. She stared at him, not knowing whether to fear him more or less. His voice came, low and steady, words she couldn't fully understand, but the tone was calm, not mocking, not cruel. Her lips trembled. She wanted to spit at him, to remind herself that he was the enemy. But the soldier reached to his belt, pulled out a small flask, and held it to her mouth. Water. She turned her head away at first. Maybe it was poison. Maybe it was a trick. The others laughed in the background, muttering things she didn't understand. But thirst burned her throat. Her lips were dry, cracked. Against her better judgment, she leaned forward and he tilted the flask carefully. Cool liquid touched her tongue, sliding down her throat. It was real water. Her body shook as she swallowed greedily, tears stinging her eyes despite her pride. He stopped before she drank too much and choked. She glared at him, confused, angry at herself for taking anything from a human. But deep inside, a small, dangerous thought flickered. Maybe not all of them were monsters. The soldier reached again, pulling a strip of cloth from his kit. He tore it with his teeth and pressed it gently against her wound. She gasped at the touch, not because it hurt, but because of the shock. A human was helping her? Her eyes darted to the other soldiers. Some looked annoyed, some amused, but none stopped him. Perhaps they thought it was meaningless. Perhaps they thought he was wasting his time. The girl clenched her fists. Her pride screamed at her to push him away, to snarl, to show defiance. But her body betrayed her. She was too tired, too weak. And the warmth of the cloth, the small relief it brought, felt like a betrayal of everything she believed. The soldier met her gaze. For the first time, she saw his eyes through the visor. They weren't cold, empty eyes of a killer. They were steady, focused, almost kind. Her chest tightened. She turned her head quickly, refusing to hold that gaze. She couldn't let herself believe in it. Humans were monsters. Monsters didn't have gentle eyes. Still, the touch lingered. The careful way he had given her water, the steady way he pressed the bandage. None of it matched the horror stories whispered by her elders. Her breathing slowed, but her heart refused to calm. She braced herself again, waiting for the mask to drop, for the cruelty to come. Any moment, the gentle hands would turn into claws, the calm voice into threats. She told herself this was just the beginning of some cruel game. But when he pulled back, he didn't sneer or laugh. He simply sat down near her, weapon resting on his knee, watching the entrance as if guarding her, not from her people, but from something else. The alien girl's body shook harder now, not from fear, but from confusion. She couldn't understand it. She didn't dare to. Still, in the silence of the ruined hall, with the smell of smoke fading and the sound of distant explosions echoing outside, one truth slipped into her heart like a dangerous seed. The human hadn't killed her. He had touched her gently. The night grew colder inside the ruined hall, the cracked walls unable to keep the wind from slipping through. She sat chained, her body weak, her mind still racing with fear and confusion. Every small sound echoed, the shuffle of boots, the low muttering of soldiers, the creak of weapons being adjusted. Her eyes never left the one soldier who had touched her wound with such care. He sat nearby, silent, almost watchful. His helmet rested on the ground now, and she could finally see his full face in the dim glow of the fire. His skin was pale compared to hers, his jaw strong, a faint scar tracing the line of his cheek. She wanted to look away, to keep her distance, but her eyes betrayed her. They kept drifting back to him, to the strange calmness he carried, so different from the others. The other humans laughed harshly as they passed around strange metal containers. The smell of cooked rations filled the air, sharp and unfamiliar. Her stomach twisted painfully. She pressed her lips together, refusing to show weakness, but the ache of hunger was impossible to hide. The soldier noticed. He picked up a small packet from the pile, tore it open, and held it out toward her. The scent of food hit her, warm and savory. She froze, glaring at him, her pride fighting against the deep ache inside her chest. He didn't force it into her hand. He didn't push it at her like the others might. He simply placed it on the floor between them and nudged it closer with 2 fingers. She looked at it, then at him. He didn't speak, only gave a slight nod. Her chains clinked softly as she reached out, hesitating. Was it a trap? Poison? Maybe? But her empty stomach growled, and she knew she couldn't last much longer without strength. Slowly, carefully, she took the packet. The taste surprised her. It was plain but filling, soft against her tongue. She ate with small, quick bites, her eyes flicking up every few seconds to see if he was watching. He was. Not with cruelty, not with amusement, but almost with relief. She wanted to ask why. Why was he helping her? Did he not see her as the enemy? Her language was useless here, and his words would mean nothing to her. Still, she tried. She pointed at herself, then at him, and tilted her head. A broken question. He raised his brow, then tapped his chest. "David," he said slowly, the sound sharp and strange. He tapped again, repeating it. "David." Her lips parted. His name. A human name. She hesitated, then tapped her own chest. "Lyra." He gave a small nod, repeating softly, "Lyra." The sound of her name in his voice made her skin prickle. It was the first time a human had said it without hatred. Before she could think further, the ground shook with a distant blast. Dust rained from the cracked ceiling, and the soldiers jumped to their feet, weapons raised. She tensed, her chains clattering as she pulled instinctively toward the wall, her heart hammered. More humans? An attack? Voices rose, sharp and commanding, but she couldn't understand them. The soldier, David, stood quickly, pulling his helmet back on. He glanced at her once, his eyes steady, then moved to the entrance with the others. She pressed herself into the shadows, fear choking her throat. Minutes stretched long. Gunfire cracked in the distance, faint but terrifying. The other humans cursed and shouted. She could only hear the chaos, unable to see what was happening. Her chains felt heavier, her body colder. She hugged her knees close, trying to make herself small. When the noise faded, the soldiers returned, tired but alive. 2 carried crates, one dragged something heavy across the floor. None of them looked at her with kindness. Their eyes were full of suspicion and dislike. She shrank further into herself. Then David returned. His eyes scanned her quickly, checking if she was hurt. She didn't move. She didn't trust her voice, didn't trust her own feelings. He walked over, crouched in front of her, and lifted the cloth he had tied to her wound earlier. The bandage was damp with blood again. He sighed softly, almost like a frustrated healer, then pressed a fresh cloth against her. She hissed at the touch, but didn't pull away. He worked carefully, tying it tighter this time, his movements firm but not cruel. When he finished, he gave her a faint nod, as if telling her she would be fine. The others mocked him. Their voices carried sarcasm, their laughter sharp. One pointed at her, made a gesture like a knife across the throat, and laughed again. Her blood ran cold. She understood that. That gesture meant only one thing: death. David didn't laugh. His jaw tightened and he muttered something back. The others rolled their eyes and walked away. She watched the firelight dance across his face as he sat back down near her. His weapon rested across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the hall's broken walls. He didn't look at her again, not directly, but she felt the weight of his presence. It was strange, terrifying, and yet a spark of something else burned inside her chest. Not trust, not yet, but confusion. A question without an answer. If humans were monsters, why did this one treat her as if she mattered? The night grew darker, the silence heavier. Lyra closed her eyes, though sleep would not come. Somewhere inside her, the fear of death still lived strong. But another feeling crept in alongside it, one she couldn't name. For the first time since her capture, she wondered if she would survive until dawn. Not because of her own strength, but because a human named David had chosen not to kill her. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers that painted the ruined hall in dim red light. Lyra's chains felt colder than before, heavy against her skin. She tried to stay awake, but her body was too weak, her eyelids too heavy. Each time she drifted close to sleep, a sudden noise, a laugh, a cough, the clatter of boots snapped her awake again. David sat not far from her, his back against a broken wall, helmet resting by his side, his weapon lay across his knees, but his head tilted slightly forward as if sleep pulled at him too. She stared at him, wondering why he kept staying close. It was almost as if he was guarding her, though that made no sense. Humans are guarded treasures, not prisoners. The night air carried the scent of smoke and oil. She thought of her home, her people, the faces she might never see again. A tight pain formed in her chest. She hated the human for confusing her heart. She hated herself more for drinking his water, for eating his food, for saying her name aloud to him. The silence cracked suddenly with voices. Harsh, angry words in the human tongue echoed from the entrance. Two soldiers stepped inside, carrying their weapons loosely, eyes glinting in the dark. They walked straight toward her. Lyra's body tensed. She pulled back against the wall, though she had nowhere to go. Their footsteps slowed as they reached her, their grins sharp and unfriendly. One crouched low, close enough that she could smell the sour stench of his breath. He muttered something she didn't understand, but the cruel edge in his tone told her enough. Her heart hammered as his hand reached out. She jerked back, chains rattling, a hiss of fear escaping her lips. The other soldier laughed, kicking the floor so the sound rang loud. But before the first soldier could touch her, a shadow moved fast. David stood, weapon in his grip, his voice cutting through the room. His words were sharp, commanding, filled with warning. The two soldiers froze. Their eyes flicked between him and Lyra, then back to him. One spat on the ground, clearly unhappy. They argued, their tones rising. Lyra could not understand the words, but she understood the tension. David's body was firm, standing between her and them, his weapon angled slightly down, but ready. The soldier who had crouched near her muttered something bitter, then shoved David's shoulder roughly as he passed. The other followed, both laughing again as they walked away. Their laughter didn't sound friendly. Lyra's pulse still raced. She had expected pain, maybe worse. Instead, she saw David standing tall, his jaw set tight, his eyes burning with anger not at her but at them. Slowly he turned back, crouching near her once more. His voice softened, just for her. She didn't understand his words, but his tone calmed the storm inside her chest. He checked the bandage again, his touch quick but careful. She sat frozen, caught between fear and something she refused to name. Her thoughts spun. Why? Why shield her from his own kind? What did it mean? Could she dare to believe that he was different? The night dragged on. She could not close her eyes without hearing their laughter again. Each creak of boots in the hall made her flinch. But David stayed near, his presence steady, his weapon close. At some point, exhaustion won. She drifted into uneasy sleep, the image of his figure guarding her the last thing she saw. When dawn broke, the ruined hall filled with pale light. The fire had died completely. Soldiers prepared their gear, their voices low but tense. Outside, the sky echoed with distant rumbling, machines, weapons, maybe battle. David handed her water again, his movements quiet, routine, as if this was normal. She sipped slowly, her chains clinking. Her stomach still twisted with unease, but her eyes met his briefly. For a moment, silence spoke louder than words. The uneasy calm didn't last. Shouts rang outside, urgent and sharp. Boots thundered. The humans grabbed their weapons. She stiffened, pressing her back against the wall. She had no idea what was happening, but her instincts screamed danger. A deafening boom shook the building, throwing dust and stone from the ceiling. Soldiers cursed, running to the entrance. Lyra's ears rang. She fought the chains, panic flooding her body. She could not die here, trapped like an animal. David ran to her side. His voice was urgent now, his eyes searching hers. He tugged at her chains, testing them, but they held firm. His jaw clenched. He shouted something toward the others, but no one answered. Another blast shook the earth, closer this time. She flinched, trembling. David's hand pressed her shoulder firmly, steadying her. His eyes locked with hers, and though she didn't understand the words, she understood the meaning. Stay still. I won't let them hurt you. Her chest tightened. It was madness to believe that. Yet something inside her wanted to. The other soldiers stormed back in, shouting, their faces grim. Smoke poured from the doorway. One pointed at her and barked an order. She didn't understand, but the gesture was clear. They blamed her. They thought she was connected to whatever danger lay outside. Her blood ran cold. They would kill her now. Before they could reach her, David raised his weapon slightly, his body blocking theirs once again. The argument exploded in loud words, anger sparking in every sound. She watched, wide-eyed, as they shouted at each other, as David stood unmoving, as if daring them to try. For a moment, everything hung on the edge of violence. Lyra's breath came fast, shallow. She braced herself for chaos, for blood. But deep inside, hidden beneath fear, a new thought sparked. This human was not like the others. And if he kept standing in front of her, he might be the only reason she lived another day. The smoke hung heavy in the morning air, drifting into the ruined hall through broken walls. Lyra's heart pounded against her ribs as the soldiers argued in sharp, fast voices she could not understand. Their anger filled the space like fire, and she knew the flames of it would soon turn toward her. She pressed her back against the cold stone, chains biting into her wrists, wishing she could disappear. David stood firm, weapon angled low but ready, his body a barrier between her and the others. His voice was calm at first, then rose, louder, cutting through theirs. His eyes burned with something she couldn't name, but it was not hatred aimed at her. The other soldiers spat curses, one even slamming his hand against the wall before storming out. Another glared at her, dragging his thumb across his throat as he left. The meaning was clear. Her death was still promised. The hall grew quieter after they left, though the echo of battle outside did not stop. Gunfire cracked in the distance, followed by dull booms that shook the ground. Lyra's stomach twisted. She had been told humans were killers, destroyers, and the chaos outside seemed to prove it. But when her gaze flicked toward David, kneeling beside her again, the stories no longer fit. He held out a canteen. She hesitated, but thirst won. She drank slowly this time, never taking her eyes off him. His face was drawn tight, his jaw set with worry. Something outside frightened him too. A thunderous blast slammed into the earth nearby. The ceiling groaned, dust raining down in thick clouds. Soldiers cursed, shouting orders. One voice screamed, then cut short with a sound that froze her blood. Lyra scrambled back against the wall, chains rattling, fear choking her throat. She pulled at the iron links until her wrists burned raw. She couldn't die chained like this. David's hands were suddenly on the shackles, pulling, twisting. His brows knitted as he tried to break them loose, but the iron held strong. His breath came fast, his voice low and urgent as he muttered words she didn't understand. Then he pulled a small blade from his belt, wedged it against the lock, and forced it. Sparks flew. Another explosion boomed, closer, so loud the ground itself seemed to leap. A piece of the ceiling cracked and fell, smashing into the floor where she had sat seconds before. Her scream echoed, but David grabbed her arm, hauling her away from the falling stone. His strength was rough, but his touch never cruel. The chains finally snapped free with a sharp crack of metal. Her arms fell forward, trembling from sudden freedom. She didn't waste a second. With a desperate burst of energy, she pushed past him and ran. The ruined hall stretched into a corridor open to the outside. Smoke stung her eyes, the taste of ash on her tongue. She stumbled forward, ignoring the humans shouting behind her. Freedom was all that mattered. She could vanish into the chaos, into the wilds, back to her people, if they still lived. But the outside was worse than she imagined. The land burned. Flames licked at broken vehicles, black smoke rolled across the sky, and the ground shook with distant blasts. Shapes moved in the distance, machines, twisted creatures set loose by the war. She froze, heart hammering, as one of the beasts prowled near, its jaws wide, eyes glowing. Her knees buckled. She tried to turn back, but her legs refused to move. The beast spotted her, its growl low and rumbling. It leapt. A shot cracked through the air. The beast jerked, falling heavy into the dirt at her feet. She gasped, stumbling backward. David stood behind her, weapon raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His chest heaved as he shouted something at her, sharp and angry, but not in cruelty. It sounded like, "Why did you run?" Her throat closed. She didn't know whether to scream or thank him. She wanted to believe it was still a trick, some twisted game. Yet his hand reached for her again, gripping her arm, pulling her away from the dead beast. His touch was firm, steady, guiding her back toward shelter. She fought him at first, wrenching against his hold, but the roar of more beasts in the distance silenced her resistance. His eyes locked with hers, and she saw no mockery there. Only urgency, only determination. Together they stumbled into the shadows of a broken building. He pressed her against the wall, his breath ragged, scanning the horizon through a crack. His weapon stayed raised, his body shielding hers without hesitation. She trembled, staring at him. Her people had always said humans would destroy her, would break her spirit, would make her beg for death. Yet here she was, alive because of him. Twice now he had saved her. Her lips parted, but no words came. She didn't know how to thank him in his tongue. Instead, she whispered her own word in her own language, the one her people used when someone saved a life. David looked at her, puzzled, then gave the smallest nod as if he understood anyway. Outside, the sky thundered again. The war had not ended. But in that moment, pressed close to the wall, her heart beat with something more than fear. For the first time, she felt safer near a human than she did running from one. The air inside the broken building was thick with dust and smoke. Lyra pressed her back against the cracked wall, her breaths shallow and uneven. Her wrists throbbed where the chains had been, the skin raw, but her freedom felt unreal. She kept staring at David, the human soldier who had broken her bonds and saved her life twice. She didn't understand him, didn't trust him, yet she couldn't deny the truth. Without him, she would already be dead. Outside, the battlefield roared. Explosions rolled across the horizon, metal clashed, and screams pierced the air. The ground trembled as machines thundered past. Every sound made her flinch, but David seemed steady, his weapon raised, his eyes sharp as he scanned the ruined streets beyond the wall. He moved like someone used to danger, someone who belonged in chaos. She felt like she was drowning in it. Her stomach twisted with hunger again, sharper this time. She wrapped her arms around herself, hoping he wouldn't notice, but of course he did. David reached into his pack and pulled out another ration, the same strange human food as before. He broke the packet open and held it out to her. Lyra froze, pride and desperation battling inside her. She didn't want his help. She didn't want to owe him anything. But her body betrayed her, trembling with need. Slowly, she took it, her fingers brushing his glove. The brief touch sent a shiver through her, though she didn't understand why. She ate quickly, barely tasting it, her eyes never leaving him. When she finished, she whispered softly, "Lyra." Then she tapped her chest again, reminding him of her name. She didn't know why she repeated it, maybe to anchor herself, maybe to test if he still remembered. He turned his head toward her, his expression softer than before. "Lyra," he said quietly, his voice firm but gentle. Then he tapped his chest. "David." Hearing him say her name again struck her like a spark. She nodded once slowly. For the first time, they weren't just captor and prisoner. They were two people in the middle of a war neither could escape. A sharp noise outside cut through the moment. Boots pounded against the ground. Voices shouted. Other soldiers, close. Lyra stiffened, fear choking her throat. If they found her free, if they saw her without chains, they would kill her without hesitation. David's jaw tightened. He grabbed her wrist, not harshly but firmly, and pulled her deeper into the shadows of the broken room. His hand pressed against her shoulder, urging her to stay low. She crouched, every nerve screaming, her heart racing so fast she thought it would tear out of her chest. The soldiers passed by, their words sharp and clipped. She couldn't understand them, but she could hear the suspicion in their voices. They paused just outside, their boots crunching on stone. One of them muttered something, his tone mocking, and laughed. Another spat on the ground. Then, after what felt like hours, they moved on. Lyra let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. David lowered his weapon slowly, his shoulders easing only slightly. His eyes met hers. For a moment, they just stared at each other in silence, both knowing how close death had come. The silence between them grew heavier. She wanted to speak, to ask why he kept protecting her, but the words didn't exist in their broken bridge of languages. Instead, she lifted her hand, pointing at him, then at herself. She tilted her head, a question unspoken. David seemed to understand. He crouched down, drawing a rough shape in the dust with the tip of his knife. A circle. He tapped it. Human, he said. Then he drew another circle, smaller, and tapped it. Lyra. His voice softened. She blinked, trying to follow. He pointed at her wound, then at himself, then made a motion of shielding, of covering. She understood enough. He was saying he would protect her. Her chest tightened, and she shook her head quickly, whispering in her own tongue, "Why?" But he only gave a faint smile, a tired one, before wiping the drawings away with his boot. A boom shook the walls, louder this time. The ceiling above them cracked, and dust rained down. David grabbed her hand, pulling her up. His grip was strong, steady, and he didn't let go as he guided her through the rubble toward another exit. They stumbled into the open, the ruined city stretching around them like a graveyard of stone and fire. The air was thick with smoke, the sky a strange, burning red. Lyra stumbled, but David pulled her along, never loosening his hold. For the first time, she wasn't bracing for death at his hands. She was trusting them to keep her alive. As they ran through the shadows, her mind spun with 1,000 questions. Were all humans like him, or was he the only one? Could she believe in his protection, or was she a fool? She didn't know, but every step they took together, every glance he gave to check if she was still there, made her wonder if the stories she had been told all her life were lies. The sound of enemy patrols grew closer again. David pressed her against a wall, his body shielding hers, his weapon ready. She trembled, her eyes locked on him. In that moment, surrounded by smoke and death, one truth burned in her heart stronger than fear. This human was not her captor anymore. He was becoming her shield. The ruined city stretched endlessly, filled with fire, smoke, and the smell of blood. Lyra's legs ached as she followed David through broken streets, every step echoing with danger. His grip on her wrist never faltered, guiding her swiftly between shadows and fallen stone. He moved like he knew this place, his eyes always searching, scanning, ready for threats. She tried to keep up, though her lungs burned and her wound throbbed with every movement. A distant roar shook the air. Machines or beasts? She couldn't tell. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and her heart jumped to her throat. David pulled her sharply into a collapsed alleyway, pressing her against a wall. He leaned out just enough to see the road ahead, his body shielding her without thought. She could feel his breath, fast and heavy, his weapon steady in his hands. She didn't understand why he kept protecting her. He was human. She was enemy. Yet he risked himself again and again. Confusion twisted inside her like a knot, but the fear outside left no room for answers. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Human voices, harsh and commanding, shouted nearby. Lyra stiffened, clutching her arms around herself. If they saw her free, without chains, they would know David had betrayed them. They would kill her, and maybe him too. David turned, his hand pressing lightly against her arm, urging her to stay silent. His eyes locked with hers, and she read the meaning clear even without words. Trust me. The patrol passed. Soldiers marched past the alley, their boots striking the ground in rhythm. Lyra held her breath until her chest ached, praying none of them turned their heads. David didn't move, his weapon ready, his body angled in front of hers. Only when the footsteps faded did he ease back, his hand dropping slowly. She gasped softly, releasing the air she had held. Her hands trembled, but she forced them still. David glanced at her, his expression softer for just a moment, then he gestured for her to follow. They moved again, deeper into the ruins. Each turn felt endless, each shadow hiding another threat. Twice they had to duck behind broken walls as enemy machines rolled by, their searchlights cutting through the smoke. Once a beast prowled close, its growl low, but David's quiet hand against her shoulder kept her frozen until it passed. Finally, They slipped into an abandoned building. The roof had collapsed, leaving jagged beams reaching toward the sky, but it was shelter. David lowered his weapon slowly, scanning the corners before letting out a long breath. Lyra sank to the ground, exhaustion crashing over her. Her wound burned, her body shaking from hunger and fear. David knelt beside her, pulling out his small kit. She flinched when his hand reached toward her side, but he only gave a firm look, waiting for her to allow him. Slowly, she moved her arms away, letting him peel back the bandage. His touch was careful again, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. She hissed at the sting, biting her lip to stay silent. He didn't stop, didn't rush, his hands steady. He tied the cloth tighter this time, then leaned back, studying her with sharp eyes. Lyra watched him quietly, her chest rising and falling too fast. She wanted to ask why. Why risk his life for her? Why give her food, water, freedom? But her tongue failed, her language useless between them. Instead, she whispered softly in her own tongue, words that would never reach him. David didn't understand, but his eyes softened anyway. He handed her another small packet of food, then sat against the wall across from her. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of everything pressed down on him. For the first time, he looked tired, human, vulnerable. The silence stretched. Outside, the war roared on, but inside the broken building, there was only the sound of their breathing. Lyra shifted slightly, her chains gone, but the marks still burning on her wrists. She traced them with her fingers, wondering if she would ever forget. Suddenly, voices echoed close again. Not the patrol this time. Different. Angrier. Closer. David stiffened, lifting his weapon. He moved quickly to the doorway, motioning for her to stay back. She obeyed, pressing into the shadows, fear gripping her chest. The voices grew louder, then boots pounded the ground. Soldiers entered the building across the street. Lyra froze. They were searching. For her. David glanced back at her once, his eyes sharp. Then he whispered something, low and urgent, before stepping forward. He positioned himself in the open, as if ready to distract them. Her chest tightened, panic flooding her. He would face them alone. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was watch as the human who had saved her again and again stepped into danger for her sake. The soldiers shouted, weapons raised. David's voice rose in return, commanding, steady, drawing their attention. They argued, their words fierce, their anger sharp. He stood unflinching, weapon ready but lowered, as if daring them to challenge him. Lyra trembled, her nails digging into her palms. She knew what was happening. He was risking himself so she could remain unseen. If they discovered her, they would kill her. But if they discovered what he had done, they would kill him too. Her chest ached, torn between fear and something stronger. She pressed a hand to her wound, forcing herself not to cry out. She didn't want to betray him, not now. For the first time, she wished she could speak his language, wished she could tell him she understood. The soldiers' voices rose higher, then footsteps pounded as they stormed away, muttering curses. David stood alone in the doorway, his shoulders tight, his jaw set. When he turned back, his eyes found hers in the shadows. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that silence, Lyra knew the truth she had tried to deny. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was choosing her. And that choice could cost him everything. Dawn broke slowly, painting the ruined city in pale light. Smoke curled into the sky, and the air carried the bitter scent of fire and blood. Lyra sat huddled in the corner of the broken shelter, her arms wrapped around her knees, her body weak but her mind restless. Sleep had not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw chains, fire, and the faces of soldiers promising her death. David stood near the entrance, silent, weapon gripped tightly as he watched the horizon. His figure looked carved from stone, unshaken by the destruction around him. Yet there was something different in his stance now. His body wasn't just guarding the world outside. It was guarding her. Lyra's chest tightened as she looked at him. She remembered the first moment she had braced for death under his hand. She had expected cruelty, pain, an end to her life. Instead, she had felt his gentle touch, his careful bandages, his calm voice. That memory clung to her like a flame in the darkness. Her lips parted, the words trembling out softly. David. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding hers. The sound of her voice seemed to soften his hard expression. He walked closer, kneeling down so they were eye level. His hand reached out, not to chain her, not to hurt her, but to adjust the bandage on her side once again. She watched him in silence, every careful movement reminding her how much he had done for her. Water when she was thirsty, food when she was starving, protection from his own soldiers, a shield between her and the battlefield. Each act broke the stories she had believed all her life. Outside, shouts erupted. Enemy patrols were closing in again. David's head snapped toward the sound. He cursed under his breath, then grabbed her wrist, pulling her up. His eyes burned with urgency. She stumbled but followed him without protest this time. They ran through shattered streets, the sound of boots and engines growing louder behind them. Every corner felt like a trap, every open road like a death sentence. Lyra's breath came fast, pain burning in her wound, but David never slowed. He half-dragged, half-guided her until they ducked into the hollow shell of a collapsed tower. Inside, the world was silent except for the thundering of her heartbeat. David pressed her against the wall gently, scanning the entrance with his weapon raised. Shadows shifted outside, voices shouted orders. The patrol was close. Her hands trembled as she touched his arm. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. She didn't want him to fight alone, not for her. But he only looked back at her, his eyes calm, his expression steady, and for a moment she thought he was telling her with just his gaze, "I will not let them take you." The footsteps stopped outside. For long seconds, the silence was suffocating. Then, slowly, the patrol moved on. Their voices faded, their boots growing distant. Lyra sagged against the wall, relief rushing through her. David lowered his weapon, his shoulders finally loosening. He turned back to her, studying her face, making sure she was unharmed. She stared at him, her throat tight. Her whole life she had been told humans were monsters, that their hands brought only death. Yet here she stood, alive, because of this one man. The lies she had carried for so long cracked apart inside her. Her voice was soft, unsteady, not monster. She struggled with the human tongue, her accent thick, but the words were clear. She touched her chest. "Lyra." Then she touched his chest gently, her fingers brushing the fabric of his uniform. "Friend." David's eyes softened. He didn't smile, not fully, but a warmth lit his face that told her he understood. He nodded once, firmly, as if sealing her words. The morning sun broke through the smoke, casting light into the hollow tower. For the first time since her capture, the world didn't look entirely broken. She sat down slowly, exhaustion weighing on her, and David sat across from her, his weapon resting beside him. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was fragile, uncertain, but it carried something new. Hope. Lyra's mind raced with questions. What would happen when his people found out? What would happen if hers did? Neither side would forgive this bond. Both of them would be hunted, hated, betrayed. But when she looked at him steady and unyielding, even in the face of death, her fear lessened. He had already chosen her more than once. He would again. Her lips trembled as she whispered one last word in her own language, a word that meant life, trust, and gratitude all at once. David didn't understand it, but the way she said it made him nod again, as though he did. The war raged outside, but inside that ruined tower, the world was different. Lyra was no longer a prisoner. She was no longer bracing for death. She was alive, safe, because a human had given her more than mercy. He had given her his gentle touch, and with it a future she had never imagined.